In the small, forgotten village of Villa Esperanza, the air was thick with superstition. The village sat on the edge of a vast river, its banks lined with thick, creeping vines that seemed to move with a life of their own. The sun beat down mercilessly on the earth, but the shadow of the old, crumbling mud house by the river bend seemed to hold its own strange power. It had been abandoned for years, or so the villagers claimed. Whispers of a curse attached to the house had kept it empty. No one dared step inside. No one, except for Luz. Luz, a young woman of 22, had grown up with the legends of Villa Esperanza, and yet, she never truly believed in them. Her mother, Isabel, had been the village healer, the one who explained the spiritual customs and taught Luz to respect the unseen world. But Isabel also taught her to be practical, to question the superstitions that governed the lives of the villagers. As a child, Luz had listened to the stories with wide eyes, her mother telling her about spirits who roamed the land, trapped between worlds. But as Luz grew older, she found herself drawn more to the physical world, the one she could touch, feel, and understand. She sold fruits at the market every day, earning just enough to get by, but life was simple, and that was all she needed. Or so she thought. The old house was an enigma. Some nights, when the moon was full and the wind carried the sounds of the river, Luz would walk the dusty path that led to the house. The villagers had warned her to stay away, to avoid the curse that had supposedly trapped the man who once lived there. But Luz never paid attention to rumors. It wasn't until one evening, as she walked home from the market with the remnants of the day's fruits, ripe mangoes and bananas not too soft, that she found herself standing before the house. Its decaying wooden door hung crookedly on its hinges, as if inviting her in. The house seemed to call her. The wind rustled through the vines that covered the walls, creating an eerie whisper, almost like a voice. Just once, Luz thought, "I leave some food for the man inside." It wasn't much, just leftover fruit, but it felt like the right thing to do. Luz carefully placed the fruit on the rotten wooden table just inside the door, speaking aloud to the man, though she knew he wouldn't respond. "Here," she said, "mangoes, bananas. I hope they are to your liking." For a moment, there was only silence, the oppressive weight of the house making her heart race. But the stillness was interrupted by a noise, a faint rustling inside, like a soft breath of wind. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The man never spoke. He never moved. As Luz walked back down the path, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't help but look over her shoulder. There, in the distance, a shadow stood in the doorway of the house, unmoving, watching her retreat. It was only the beginning of something that would change her life forever. Over the next several days, Luz found herself returning to the house. At first, it was just out of curiosity. She had left the fruit for the man, but he had never acknowledged her, never even moved. Still, she couldn't resist. The pull of the house was too strong. Each evening, after a long day in the market, she would gather the remaining fruit from her stand, bananas, mangoes, and sometimes a stray avocado, and head toward the house. The path was becoming familiar, like a ritual, and Luz couldn't explain why she felt the need to continue. On the fifth day, she arrived at the house earlier than usual, the sun hanging low in the sky. The air was warm, and the river seemed to hum with a strange energy. She placed the fruit carefully on the table and, for the first time, dared to speak. "I don't know what you're waiting for," she said softly, though the man never spoke back. But I hope this helps. But this time, as she stood to leave, she felt something different. The wind shifted, and the faintest creak of wood echoed in the distance. She turned, half expecting to see nothing, but there it was, a shadow, shifting at the edge of the door, almost imperceptible. The man had moved. Luza's heart raced as she watched. His figure, though still blurry in the fading light, seemed to stand straighter. The shape of his shoulders was clearer now, his frame tall but hunched, as if he had been waiting for something, waiting for her. He did not speak. He simply watched. Luz took a step closer, but the house seemed to hold her back, like an invisible force keeping her at bay. She wondered if she was simply imagining it, her mind playing tricks on her. The house had always felt like it held secrets, things it didn't want to reveal. But there was something more than just mystery. The man wasn't dead, not in the way the villagers believed. He was alive, trapped, perhaps, but alive. "Who are you?" Luz whispered under her breath. The man did not respond. But his eyes, dark and empty, like the night sky, seemed to pierce through her. There was a sadness in them, an aching sorrow that made her chest tighten. The sense that something was wrong, that this house and the man inside it had stories yet untold, grew stronger. Luz didn't know it then, but that moment would change her life. She had made a connection with the man in the house, a bond that was stronger than the superstitions that ruled the village. And with that bond came power, power that Luz was not ready for. The following days unfolded in a strange haze. Luz couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, though she wasn't sure how or why. She started visiting the house more frequently, not just out of curiosity but because there was an undeniable pull, an unseen force calling her back. Each time, she would leave food, speak to the man, and feel the same unsettling silence. One evening, as she approached the house with another offering of fruit, something different happened. The air felt charged, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual. As Luz entered the house, she sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable energy that made her skin prickle. There, sitting in the dim light, was the man, Mateo, though she didn't know his name yet. His features were half hidden in the darkness, but she could see his face clearly now. His skin was rough and weathered, like tree bark, cracked and dry. His eyes were deep pools of black, empty yet filled with something she couldn't describe, something ancient, haunted. Mateo sat as if frozen, staring out the window, his body tense yet unmoving. His hair was unkempt, tangled like weeds, and his clothes were torn and ragged, as though he had been abandoned there for years. His gaze, though, was the most unsettling thing of all. It seemed to pierce through Luz, reading her thoughts, understanding her fears. It was as if he could see into her very soul. Her voice trembled as she spoke to him, not sure what to expect. "You've been waiting, haven't you?" He didn't respond. His eyes didn't even flicker. But Luz felt it. There was something stirring in the air, something alive between them. The house, the vines, and the river all seemed to hold their breath as if they were waiting for something, something that Luz didn't yet understand. She didn't know why she was drawn to this place, to this man. But she knew one thing for sure, her life had just changed forever. Luz returned to the village the next day with a sense of unease gnawing at her. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the air around her felt heavier, charged. The world around her had shifted somehow, but she didn't understand how. She found herself watching the river more often, feeling a magnetic pull toward the old house, where Mateo had waited for her. The following days proved even stranger. Abuela Rosa, her grandmother, who hadn't moved from her bed in weeks, was suddenly up and walking. At first, Luz assumed it was a trick of the light or her mind playing games on her. But as the days passed, Abuela Rosa was not only walking, she was moving with a grace that had not been seen for months. Luz couldn't deny it anymore, something extraordinary was happening. Her fruit stall at the market began to attract more customers than ever. Luz had never been a stranger to hard work, but the market was bustling like never before, with people asking for her fruits by name. Strangers who had never before set foot in her stall were now offering triple the usual price for her bananas and mangoes, claiming that they tasted like home. But with these strange blessings came suspicion. As the days went by, the villagers began to whisper more loudly. Some came to her stall with eager faces, praising her work. Others, like Carlos, the village elder, pulled her aside to warn her. "Don't be fooled by these so-called miracles," he warned, his voice low. "The curse of that house of Mateo is real. You are walking a dangerous path." But Luz dismissed his warnings. She couldn't explain it, but there was a feeling in her heart, a sense of rightness, every time she entered the house and spoke to Mateo. She was drawn to him, to the connection that was now growing between them. The blessings were not from her doing, she understood that now. But the villagers saw things differently. And soon, their fear began to outweigh their admiration. The next time Luz entered the house, her heart raced in anticipation. She had been visiting the house for several weeks now, speaking to Mateo every evening. He never answered, never looked at her, but still, she felt a connection, something deep and ancient pulling her in. But tonight, something was different. As she approached the table where she usually left the food, she noticed that Mateo had shifted. His head was turned slightly toward her, and for the first time, his gaze met hers. It was brief, just a flicker, but it sent a wave of heat crashing through her chest. Luz froze, her heart pounding in her ears. Mateo's dark eyes stared at her, as though he had been watching her all along, waiting for this moment. "You see me now, don't you?" she whispered, unable to stop herself. But Mateo didn't speak. He didn't need to. The exchange was enough. It felt as if something had been awakened within him, something long dormant. And as Luz stood there, trembling with the weight of that acknowledgement, she couldn't help but wonder, what was she getting herself into? As the days passed, Luz began to notice that the changes were becoming harder to ignore. People had begun to praise her more openly for her newfound abilities. Her stall was crowded daily, and her once simple life seemed to be transforming into something much larger than she had ever imagined. But the growing attention, while flattering, also brought discomfort. She had always been a quiet, humble woman, preferring the serenity of her small routine. Now, the weight of people's expectations bore down on her shoulders. It was during this time that Raphael began to show more interest. He was charming, confident, and seemed to take a genuine interest in her life. Raphael was the kind of man the villagers admired, wealthy, well-spoken, and charismatic. He quickly became a regular at her fruit stall, always bringing up topics of importance and offering her what seemed like harmless advice. But Luz couldn't shake the feeling that his interest in her went beyond friendship. One afternoon, as she was packing her remaining fruits into a basket, Raphael approached her with a proposal. "Luz," he began, his voice smooth and persuasive, "I've been thinking. You don't belong here. You have something special, something the world needs. Let me take you away from this place. We could leave all this behind, start anew, in the city. A place where your talents could flourish. I want to help you." Luz hesitated. The idea of leaving her home, her grandmother, and the village she knew seemed impossible. But Raphael's words held a weight that was hard to ignore. It was tempting. He made her feel as though she had a greater purpose beyond the confines of Villa Esperanza, a place that, despite its beauty, felt small and stifling. But as she looked into Raphael's eyes, something felt off. There was a sharpness behind his charm, a subtle, calculated look that made her uncomfortable. Raphael wasn't just offering her a new life, he was offering her an escape from the very thing that had given her strength, her connection to Matteo, the house, and the power she was slowly discovering. "I can't," she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I need to stay here. There's something I must do." Raphael's face darkened for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "As you wish, Luz. But know this, if you ever change your mind, I'll be here. You don't have to do this alone." And with that, he left, leaving Luz to ponder his words. As Luz continued her visits to the house, the blessings surrounding her life grew more pronounced. Abuela Rosa was healthier than ever, her spirits lifted, and the village started to look at Luz with new eyes. Her stall was always full, her fruits perfect and sweet, as if the earth itself was nourishing them with care. But with the miracles came fear. The villagers who had once smiled at her now whispered in hushed tones behind her back. Some were in awe of her apparent gifts, but others, particularly Pastor Gabriel, grew suspicious. Pastor Gabriel had always been a staunch believer in the old ways, the teachings of the church, and the strict boundaries between the divine and the unholy. As Luz's blessings multiplied, his unease grew. One Sunday after Mass, Pastor Gabriel called her over. He was stern, his face twisted in a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Luz," he began, his voice low but firm, "I've been hearing things. People say that your fruits are more than just fruits, that your hands hold some kind of power. This is dangerous. You must know that the power you're receiving isn't of God. There are forces at play here, and they don't come from the light." Luz felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She knew there was more to her newfound abilities than she could explain, but she didn't feel it was evil. She was merely helping people, making their lives a little better. "I don't know what's happening to me, Pastor Gabriel," she admitted. "But I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just trying to help." But Pastor Gabriel's gaze hardened. "Help? Or are you leading people into darkness? You've been touched by something, Luz, something not of this world. The house by the river, don't think I haven't noticed. Stay away from it. It holds a curse that no one can escape." Luz's heart sank. The tension between the villagers and her was growing stronger. Her desire to help, to heal, was being overshadowed by fear, suspicion, and the growing realization that the connection to Matteo might not be as innocent as she had thought. The whispers in the village soon turned into accusations. Pastor Gabriel was relentless in his campaign against her, gathering the villagers to question Luz's actions. He called for an emergency church meeting, and Luz found herself standing in front of a crowd that had once been her neighbors, now turned into an angry mob. "This woman claims to heal with her hands, but at what cost?" Pastor Gabriel shouted, his voice echoing through the church. "She has embraced a power that belongs to the devil. The house by the river has cursed this village, and she's its puppet. Do not let her deceive you." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces twisted in fear and distrust. Luz felt the heat rise in her chest, but she stood tall, her resolve unshaken. "I am not cursed," she said firmly, her voice carrying. "I don't know why this is happening to me, but I'm not using any dark power. I'm trying to help. I only want to make things better." "You are too naive," Pastor Gabriel retorted. "The forces you're dealing with are ancient and powerful. If you don't turn away from them, you will destroy us all." The tension in the air was suffocating. Luz could see the fear in the villagers' eyes. Some of them stood behind her, but many more looked at her with suspicion. In that moment, Luz understood the truth: she was no longer just a woman helping her village. She was a symbol of something much bigger, something that could either heal or destroy. and the cost of the blessings she had received was becoming clearer every day. It was on the night following the confrontation with the villagers that Luz returned to the house. Her heart was heavy with doubt and confusion, but she knew one thing for certain: she needed to understand Mateo. He was the key to everything that was happening. "I need answers," she whispered as she entered the house, her voice trembling. As if on cue, Mateo shifted in the shadows. The air seemed to thicken, and a low hum vibrated through the walls. His gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time, his lips parted. "I was once a great seer," Mateo's voice was hoarse and deep. "I was betrayed by those I trusted, cursed to remain between worlds, neither living nor dead. Only those pure of heart could break the curse. Only you." The revelation hit Luz like a storm. Mateo had been a guardian, a protector of secrets, but now he was lost in time, a man cursed by those who feared his power. Luz had been chosen to set him free, to break the curse he had carried for so long. But what did that mean for her? "I don't understand," Luz whispered. "Why me?" "Because you see me," Mateo replied, his eyes filled with something ancient. "And when you help the unseen, you bring balance to a broken world." The weight of his words settled over Luz, and she understood. She was no longer just a girl from a small village. She was tied to something much greater than herself, a force that could either heal or destroy the world. Luz's connection with Mateo deepened, so too did the pressure from the village. The suspicion surrounding her grew stronger, and she could feel the eyes of everyone in Villa Esperanza on her. Even Raphael, who had once seemed like a supportive figure, now appeared to be more focused on her power than her well-being. One evening, after a long day at the market, Luz was walking back to her house when she saw Raphael waiting by the edge of the path. His face was shadowed by the evening light, but his smile was as charming as ever. "Luz," he said, stepping toward her. "I've been thinking. You're holding something precious. You don't even realize it yet." Luz stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking slightly. She had always felt drawn to Raphael, but lately, his presence made her uneasy. There was something about him that felt off. "What do you mean?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "I mean," he began, his voice low and coaxing, "that power you have, what if you could use it for more? What if you could stop all the suffering in this village, in the world? You could do more than heal. You could be a force no one could stand against." Luz's stomach churned. She had suspected that Raphael had ulterior motives, but now it was clear. "I don't want to control anyone," she said, shaking her head. "I'm only trying to help." "But helping is limiting yourself," Raphael countered, stepping closer. "Think about it, Luz. You could have everything you ever wanted. You could leave this place behind and live without the fear and the whispers. Just imagine it. You could have power beyond your wildest dreams. And I can help you achieve that." A chill ran down Luz's spine. "I don't need your help," she said firmly. "And I don't need power. I need to understand what's happening to me." Raphael's eyes darkened, and his smile faltered. "You don't even see it, do you?" he muttered. "You've already taken the first step toward it. Your power is undeniable. All I'm offering is the means to embrace it fully. Don't be a fool, Luz. This is your chance." Luz backed away, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She turned and walked quickly back to her home, her heart racing. Raphael's offer had been seductive, but it was clear now that he wanted to control her. He saw her not as a person, but as a tool to achieve his own ends. Luz knew she had to be cautious. There was more at play here than she had first realized, and Raphael was part of a bigger, darker web she was only just beginning to understand. The next morning, Luz found herself at a crossroads. Raphael's words had lingered in her mind, and the pressure from the villagers continued to grow. As the day wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, by Pastor Gabriel, by Raphael, by the village itself. Every step she took seemed to echo with the weight of her decisions. It was then that Woro arrived. He was an elderly man, weathered by time, with deep-set eyes that had seen the world in ways Luz could only begin to comprehend. Woro had been exiled from Villa Esperanza many years ago, his spirit broken after a failed attempt to warn the village of a darkness that was slowly creeping into their world. Luz had heard his name in whispers, but had never met him. When Woro approached Luz at the market, there was no mistaking the urgency in his voice. He pulled her aside, away from the bustling crowds, and spoke in hushed tones. "Luz," he said, his voice gravelly, "you've been touched by something ancient. The cause you're connected to is not just Mateos, it's far older. It was set in motion long before you were born. You must understand the forces you are dealing with." Luz felt a wave of unease. "I don't understand. I'm just trying to help. I don't want power. I don't want to hurt anyone." Woro looked at her with pity. "That's what they all say. The problem is, the power has already been unleashed. It's already inside you, and it's not something you can walk away from. There are forces, dark forces, that will come for you. You have to learn to control them, or they will control you." "But how?" Luz asked, her voice trembling. "I don't even know how this started. It just happened." "That's the cause," Woro replied. "It's not just the house or Mateo, it's your bloodline, Luz. You're tied to something much older, much darker. And the sooner you accept it, the sooner you can learn to wield the power, rather than be its victim." Luz felt her heart pound in her chest. "What am I supposed to do? I can't run from it. I can't." Woro placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man so weathered. "You must confront it. You must face the truth about who you are, and what you're meant to do. And remember this, no one can do it alone." The days following Woro's warning were filled with more tension than Luz had ever felt. She could feel the presence of something dark hovering around her, something watching, waiting. The house by the river no longer felt like a sanctuary. Instead, it felt like a trap, drawing her deeper into a world she was afraid to understand. Then, one evening, as Luz made her usual visit to the house, she found it empty. The table where she had placed the food was bare, and Mateo, the man who had once sat there, motionless and silent, was gone. Panic surged through her. "Mateo," she whispered into the empty room, her voice breaking the silence. "Where are you?" She searched the house, calling his name, but there was no answer. His absence felt like a loss, a deep, aching void that seemed to swallow the very air around her. Confused and fearful, she returned to the village, desperate to find someone who could help. But when she spoke of Mateo's disappearance, the villagers only grew more fearful. They whispered that the curse had claimed him, just as they had feared. Pastor Gabriel's words echoed in her mind, "The house is cursed. You're playing with forces you don't understand." Luz was lost. The one person who had shown her the truth, the one who had been the key to her understanding, was gone without a trace. Days passed with no sign of Mateo. Luz couldn't focus. She couldn't understand what had happened to him or why he had left. The villagers' fear only grew, and Luz felt more isolated than ever. Then, on the fourth day after Mateo's disappearance, a boy arrived at her doorstep. He was no older than 12, with wide, curious eyes that seemed to see far beyond his years. He handed her a mango, warm to the touch, and a small note written in Quechua, a language Luz barely understood. She opened the note, and her breath caught as she read the words, "The soil remembers." Confused, Luz clutched the note tightly in her hand. She didn't know who had left it, or why, but there was a message here, one that she needed to understand. It felt like a sign that Mateo hadn't truly disappeared, that he was still watching over her, guiding her. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing became clear: Mateo had left her a message, a clue. And now, it was up to her to follow it. The following morning, with newfound resolve, Luz decided to leave the village. She couldn't stay here, not with the growing danger and the fear that surrounded her. The note had given her a direction: the mountains. The Andes, a place of ancient power and secrets, where she might uncover the truth behind her powers and the curse that had consumed her life. With Waru's warning still fresh in her mind, Luz packed a small bag and set out toward the distant mountains. As she walked through the village, the familiar sights felt distant. She was leaving behind everything she knew, but she couldn't remain in the village any longer. The journey to the Andes Mountains was harder than Luz had anticipated. The terrain grew steeper with every passing hour, the air thinner, and the weight of her thoughts pressing heavily on her chest. Her mind was consumed with questions, doubts, and fears. She had always thought of herself as a simple woman with simple needs. But now, it seemed that her life was intertwined with forces beyond her understanding.
On the third day of her journey, she arrived at a small, ancient stone temple nestled high in the mountains. The temple had an air of sacredness to it, its worn stone pillars overgrown with vines and moss. She could feel the presence of someone, watching her as she stepped inside. The air was thick with energy, almost vibrating with power. In the center of the temple was an altar, covered in dust but still strong, as if it had been used in some distant past. Luz approached it cautiously, her heart beating faster as she sensed that the answers she was looking for might be within her grasp. As she knelt at the altar, a gust of wind swept through the temple, stirring the leaves and vines outside. Suddenly, a voice echoed in her mind, a deep and resonant voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the temple. "You have come, child of the unseen." The words were not spoken aloud, but felt instead like a wave crashing against her mind. Luz stiffened, a shiver running down her spine. She looked around, but saw no one. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A form began to materialize in the air before her, a shimmering figure of light, its shape shifting like mist. It was a spirit, its features indistinct yet powerful, and it seemed to float just above the ground, its energy radiating through the temple. "I am the guardian of the threshold," the spirit said, its voice like the wind itself. "You are the one who has awakened what was long dormant. The curse, the gift, both are part of you now." Luz felt a deep sense of awe and fear as the spirit spoke. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you mean? What am I supposed to do?" The spirit's form flickered, and for a brief moment, Luz saw the image of Mateo in the shifting light, a shadow of him, as if his very soul was connected to the spirit. You are the key, the spirit said, the one who will break the chains of those who are trapped between worlds. Mateo, he has been waiting for you. His curse was not meant to last forever. You must embrace the power you now hold, or it will destroy you. Luz felt the weight of the words pressing down on her. But how? How can I control it? How can I save him? The spirit's form seemed to grow brighter, and it extended a hand toward her. You must face the darkness, Luz. The curse was created by betrayal, by fear, and it has consumed Mateo for years. It is your light, your heart, that will free him. But you must be willing to give yourself fully to the path ahead. Luz closed her eyes, feeling the energy of the temple course through her. She had no choice but to continue on this journey, no choice but to face the unknown. She had already felt the weight of her powers, and the burden they carried. But now, for the first time, she understood that they were a gift and a curse. The journey back from the mountains was quicker, though Luz's mind was burdened with the knowledge she had gained. The spirit in the temple had shown her a path, but it wasn't an easy one. She had to confront the darkness that had twisted Mateo's soul and, in doing so, unlock the power within herself. As Luz returned to Villa Esperanza, the weight of her new role pressed heavily on her. The village was in turmoil. Pastor Gabriel had escalated his accusations, and rumors of Luz's powers had turned many against her. Raphael had all but disappeared after their confrontation, but the damage had already been done. Luz was seen as both a savior and a threat. One night, after her return, Luz made her way to the house by the river. She felt the pull again, stronger than ever. She knew that the time had come. She had to confront Mateo, and whatever lay in the darkness that had consumed him. As she stepped into the house, the familiar silence surrounded her, but this time, it was different. Mateo stood at the center of the room, his back to her. His posture was stiff, his head down. But the air felt heavy with anticipation. She could feel his presence, like a force pulling at her soul. "Mateo," she whispered. The man turned, his eyes still empty, but this time there was something more in them, something that resembled recognition, a flicker of life. He took a step toward her, slowly, as though unsure of his own body. "You've come," he said, his voice raw and strained, as though it hadn't been used in years. Luz's heart pounded in her chest. "I've come to help you," she said softly. "I don't know how, but I'll try. I have to break the curse. I have to free you." Mateo's face twisted in a mix of pain and sadness. "You cannot break it," he whispered. "The curse is in your blood now, in your heart. The darkness is part of you, just as it is part of me." But Luz shook her head, stepping closer. "No," she said firmly. "I am not the curse. I am the light that can end it. I am here to heal." The room seemed to grow colder as Luz reached out toward Mateo. Her hand trembled as she touched his, but she didn't pull away. She focused on the warmth inside her chest, the power she had felt growing ever since her first encounter with Mateo. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint light began to glow around Luz's hand. It spread across her body, slowly, as if waking from a long slumber. Mateo's form flickered with an ethereal light, and his body seemed to shimmer, like a mirage in the air. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, like thunder in the still night. Luz gasped as a surge of energy blasted through her, overwhelming her senses. The curse, the darkness, was breaking. And with it came a flood of emotions, memories of betrayal, sorrow, and regret. Mateo fell to his knees, his form flickering in and out of existence. He looked up at Luz, his face softened by gratitude and pain. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You freed me." The curse had been broken. Mateo was no longer the man trapped between life and death. He was whole again, freed from the chains of betrayal and pain. But the weight of the power he had held was not without consequence. Luz stood in the empty house, the silence now feeling like a sign of closure. The battle was over, but the path ahead remained uncertain. She had become the guardian of the unseen, the protector of those who were forgotten. As dawn broke, she left the house behind and made her way to Waru. The old man had been right. She could no longer walk the path of simplicity. She was bound to the spiritual forces of the world, and it was her responsibility to ensure that balance was maintained. Waru greeted her with a knowing smile. He had seen the transformation in her, and though he had passed on much of his knowledge, he knew that Luz was ready to stand on her own. "The cycle continues," Waru said, his voice calm and steady. "You have freed Mateo, but your journey is far from over. You must protect the balance. You must keep the unseen world safe." Luz embraced her new role, knowing that it came with challenges and dangers. The blessings she had once seen as gifts were now part of her responsibility. The villagers had begun to look at her differently, some with reverence, others with fear, but Luz stood tall. Her first task as the new guardian was to restore peace, to heal the rifts that had been caused by her powers. She returned to the village, not as the woman who had been feared, but as the one who would protect them all, from the dangers of both the seen and the unseen. As the new dawn rose over Villa Esperanza, Luz found herself standing at the center of a village on the edge of transformation. The power that had been awakened within her was no longer something she could ignore, it was part of her now. And with that power came the responsibility to protect it, to ensure that the forces of darkness would never again threaten the balance she had fought so hard to restore. Though she had freed Mateo, the work didn't stop there. The village had already begun to change in subtle ways. Some people looked at her with awe and respect, while others still regarded her with fear, unsure of the forces she now controlled. Pastor Gabriel, who had once tried to banish her, now kept his distance. His once booming voice was quieter, and his words held a tinge of uncertainty. Raphael had vanished after their confrontation, his motivations now fully revealed as self-serving. But Luz was no longer just the village healer or the young woman who sold fruits in the market. She was now the guardian of the unseen, a title that felt both weighty and sacred. One morning, as she walked through the village, a young girl ran up to her, breathless and wide-eyed. "Luz, please. Come quickly," the girl cried, grabbing her hand. Luz followed her to the outskirts of the village, where she found a scene that sent a chill down her spine. A man, pale and sweating, lay on the ground, his body writhing in agony. His eyes were wide with fear as he clawed at the earth, his breath shallow and desperate. "He's been like this for hours," an older woman said, her voice trembling. "No one knows what happened. He just collapsed and began riding like he was possessed." Luz knelt beside the man, her hands hovering over him as she closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself to feel for the unseen forces at play. What she sensed made her heart race. A dark presence clung to him, a curse that was not of the earth. This was no mere sickness. "This is dark magic," Luz whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the urgency she felt. The power that had once held Mateo trapped was now being used against the villagers. Luz knew that the curse had not only affected the world of the dead but also the world of the living. There were still forces that wished to exploit her power, and they were now coming for the villagers she had sworn to protect. She placed her hands over the man's chest, channeling her energy into him. Her fingers glowed with the ethereal light she had come to know as her own, the force that flowed through her, binding the unseen world to the tangible one. The air around her grew thick with energy, the ground beneath her feet vibrating with the pulse of power. Slowly, the man's body stilled, his breath returning to a regular rhythm. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in hours, the fear left his face. He blinked, confused, as though waking from a long nightmare. "What happened?" he croaked. "You were cursed," Luz said softly, helping him sit up. "But you're safe now. It's over." The villagers around her gasped, their fear and disbelief turning into awe as they watched Luz's power in action. The older woman who had called for help dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Luz. Thank you." Luz didn't feel the rush of triumph she expected. Instead, her heart weighed heavy with the knowledge of how easily her power could be misused. There were still dark forces out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the village, waiting for an opportunity to strike again. As the days turned into weeks, Luz continued to protect the village, but the shadows of doubt and fear were never far from her thoughts. The blessing she had once seen as a gift now felt more like a burden. Each act of healing, each intervention in the lives of the villagers, only deepened her awareness of how fragile the balance was. Her role as guardian was not one she had asked for, but it was one she had to accept. One evening, as she stood in her small garden, watching the sunset, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the field. It was Mateo, though he was no longer the man she had first encountered, broken and lost between life and death. His form was solid, his eyes clear, and the sadness that had once clung to him seemed to have lifted. "You've done well, Luz," he said, his voice gentle and filled with gratitude. "You have embraced your role as guardian. But know this, the path ahead will not always be easy. There are still those who will try to manipulate you, use you for their own purposes. You must remain vigilant." Luz nodded, her expression serious. "I know. There's so much I don't understand. But I'm willing to learn." Mateo smiled, his face softening with pride. "You are stronger than you think. The power you hold is not just a weapon, it's a gift. A gift to heal, to protect, to guide. But it must be used with wisdom and compassion, not fear. You will be tested again, but I have faith in you." Luz felt the weight of his words settle deep within her heart. She wasn't alone in this. Mateo had returned to the world, freed from his curse, but his role in the balance was not over. He had been a guide to her, but now it was her turn to carry the torch. "I won't fail," she promised quietly, her voice steady. Mateo nodded once, his eyes filled with something like peace. The cycle continues. The unseen world is in your hands now, Luz. And as long as you stay true to yourself, there will always be light to guide you. With that, Mateo stepped back into the shadows, his form fading like mist in the air. And for the first time in months, Luz felt at peace. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was no longer afraid. She was no longer the girl who had stumbled into a world of power and mystery. She was the guardian of the unseen, and her journey had just begun. Years passed, and Luz became a legend in Villa Esperanza. The villagers who had once feared her now revered her. Under her protection, the village flourished. Her once small, quiet stall had grown into a thriving marketplace, a place of healing and warmth where people came not only for the fruit of the earth but for wisdom and guidance. Luz had not only healed the village, she had healed herself, embracing her role as the guardian of the unseen with grace, compassion, and strength. The darkness she had faced would never truly disappear, but with each day, she grew stronger, more resolute. And as the sun set over Villa Esperanza, casting a golden glow across the mountains and river, Luz knew one thing for certain: the cycle of light and shadow would continue, and she would be there to protect it. The journey of Luz is just beginning, and the world of the unseen is vast and filled with both wonders and dangers. Do you have the courage to embrace your own path, just as Luz did? Share this story with others who need to be reminded that light and darkness are two sides of the same coin, and only those who confront both can truly find their strength. Join Luz on her journey of self-discovery, and don't miss out on the next chapter of the mystical world of Villa Esperanza. Subscribe, share, and keep following for more tales that awaken the power within.